After an array of issues today. After an array of issues, my laptop, with everything going on, and of course, the phenomenal distraction from Linda's episode this morning. It got me a little late. Got me a little late on this show, but I'm here, guys. An hour and a half late. I'm here to talk some DFS for this Thursday night slate. So yeah, get excited. Let's go ahead and kick this show off and get this thing rolling.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Chase Vernon.
That's right, guys. What's going on? Welcome on into Fantasy Intervention. We have a DFS show coming at you guys, hot and heavy. And this is a matchup that I'm going to be attacking hot and heavy in this DFS. It's probably one of my favorite single slate DFSs that I've had this entire season. I mean, we have enough mystery to not make things just complete chalk while still having some variables to where it's not just completely spread out. Like, I don't have to sit there and decide between, 6 different receivers and 4 different running backs on a team as to where the production is going to go. There is a storyline as to where we can actually see this following. And it's not just the luck, for what we saw in week 1 when they first matched up. I mean, we're talking about a completely different weather scheme. We're talking about a completely different, health variation of who's actually in the game and who's not. And it's something as to where, like, there are so many different routes you can go, but at least you can tell storylines as to where these players match up and where they line up. So the first thing that I want to bring up, we have an injury report going on there. We have Denzel Ward, who could be out. Calais Campbell most likely will play, but be on a limited snap count. There's a few other variables over there, but nothing that is game-changing overall. And the reason why I'm saying not game-changing overall, including for Denzel Ward, is because this is going to be a cold, ugly game. I mean, this temperature is going to be just above freezing. It's going to be right around that 33 to 38 degree range or so. We're going to have rain. It could be sleet. Maybe we could see a little bit of snow from time to time. But this game is going to be something like we saw with the Browns in the weeks where they faced Philly, and I believe Tennessee as well. Maybe not Tennessee. Whoever it was, maybe the Raiders is who it was. But either way, we're going to see winds that are approaching 20 miles per hour with gusts that are going to shoot up there as well. And with this wet ball scenario, both these teams like to run. So this is a game that I can 100% get behind attacking the running game. But it's not going to be all running games. I'm over there and I'm loving, like, Marquise Brown, maybe to a fault. DPJ, previously, I've loved him to a fault. And, I still can see an avenue as to where he produces, but they brought in Marvin Hall. We have Higgins in there who's probably going to see a good amount of targets. How often are these guys going to pass? Is Jarvis Landry actually going to be relevant? And there are so many, like I said, different ways that this can go, but the values are still there to be had. So let me wet the whistle and get this thing rolling off, guys. There's going to be passing in this game. It's not going to be all running. There's going to be deep shots. But you do have to temper expectations for this pass catching or these pass catchers in this matchup. If we sit there and we look at the Brown side of things, right? They had 3 nasty weather games that they played in weeks 8 through 11. Week 9, they had a bye. So they did have 3 games in that time period. Baker Mayfield completed 5 of his 11 deep passes for a 45% completion percentage and 152 yards. Now, that's not bad. That's actually pretty solid. It's right along the lines of, where Kirk Cousins was in terms of completion percentages. But the passer rating was a little bit down. And in comparison, over the past 2 weeks, Baker Mayfield, he was on fire, keep in mind, so I don't expect, this to continue, but he was 6 for 8 for 192 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, this is what this offense is built for. This is what Stefanski wants to be. He wants to grind it out. He wants to have high completion percentages, and he wants to use the play action fake and target downfield. Kirk Cousins last year in the same offense had 108.7 passer rating, while 30% of his touchdowns came on deep passes. So this is something that Stefanski still wants to explore. It's just how often is he going to explore this in poor weather conditions, especially with the night game. So looking at the matchups, we have Rashad Higgins, we have Landry, we have DPJ. They actually all grade out better than their opposing cornerbacks do. If we sit there, we use PFF's chart table for wide receiver versus cornerback comparisons. But honestly, like sitting there and looking at it as a whole, I'm not sure that we're going to see a lot of production out of these guys, even if it was fair weather. I mean, we sit there and we look at the Ravens against the wide receivers, and they're allowing the league lowest in explosive pass plays. They're number 1. They're really good at not allowing deep passes. A lot of it has to do with the blitz and the pressure they get on the quarterbacks. The other part has to do with the fact that their cornerbacks play off the line of scrimmage in a lot of cases outside of, I believe, Marcus Peters. So if I'm sitting there, right, and I'm looking at some of, the recent games, we have like the Dallas Cowboys, who, by the way, the Ravens just played last week and could be the most explosive pass play team the Ravens have played since the Chiefs or the Texans in weeks 2 and 3. Outside of that, they have not played a lot of these explosive passing teams. I'm not saying that the Browns have that explosion, but they at least have the potential, and they showed that last week. So sitting there looking at it, I'm not saying that the Browns could light them up or anything, but all 3 of the starting receivers for the Dallas Cowboys had double-digit points up against the Ravens this past week. I'm sitting there looking at the fact that maybe we don't see 3 different receivers have double-digit fantasy points, but maybe one of these receivers could actually go off and have a big game. We have Anthony Everett, who actually should be the starting right cornerback when they go to nickel situations. With Denzel Ward, with everything going on over there with the defensive situations, Anthony Everett could actually be starting in there. And Anthony Everett, he's a young kid. Like, he's just now kind of getting in the league and getting his feet underneath him. Now, the dude's super athletic, but I'm sitting there looking at it, and he was owned by Michael Gallup last week. And guess what? Donovan Peoples-Jones actually plays a very similar, if not the same position. So once again, we're talking about a very poor weather matchup, but the potential upside is there for Donovan Peoples-Jones to produce again. And Baker Mayfield is showing an increase, security with throwing him the deep ball that we've seen now 2 or 3 games so far this season. The upside there for DPJ is undeniable, but I'm not locking him into my lineups, right? He's more of a dart throw even at 4,800. The price 4,800, that makes me cringe. It does. It makes me cringe. I'm not a huge fan of him being at 4,800, but I do think that he could be considered a dart throw. We're talking about maybe 10 to 15, maybe even 20% of your leagues. I do think that opportunity needs to be explored. Rashad Higgins, this is something where he's in a very similar spot pricing-wise, a little bit more expensive, but he has a tougher matchup as well. He should see Marcus Peters a good amount of the time. And Marcus Peters, he's been sketched so far this season. He's let some big plays go. He's let receivers actually rack up receptions on him, but he hasn't been like the worst cornerback on the season. And typically, this is how Marcus Peters operates. I don't know why, but for some strange reason, Marcus Peters, he sits there, he struggles in the beginning of the season. He starts to figure things out. He starts to get comfortable with the rest of the defense. And then he starts to really take tremendous steps forward in being a better cornerback overall. We could see that again this week up against Rashad Higgins, or I should say this season. It could start this week up against Rashad Higgins, who, man, this guy, he has these random games where he hammers it home, but I just don't see that happening this week, especially without the volume in the passing game. Right now, he is that second option, arguably with Kareem Hunt and, Austin Hooper, who Austin Hooper's actually out this week, but he's going to need volume in order to produce. He's not as much of a big play guy. I don't see it happening this week up against Marcus Peters. I'm going to be fading Rashad Higgins. He will still make it into 1 or 2 of my lineups, but I'm going to be fading him for the most part. Now, typically with the lineups that I will be playing him in, It's going to be with the Ravens when they ultimately dominate, and Higgins actually can get some garbage time and some volume, some higher end production towards the tail end of the game. Like I said, that's going to be very far and few between. Now, Jarvis Landry, who, by the way, actually has now 2 games in a row where he has 2 touchdowns. Unfortunately, those 2 games have actually come, or those 2 touchdowns have come in the last 2 games. So we're talking about 2 touchdowns in the entire season. And this was his 3rd best producing week in terms of yardage. We're talking 62 yards. That's absolutely brutal. I know that he gets receptions. I know that he can have weeks where he absolutely booms and he can get touchdowns from time to time. But he's going to be facing Humphreys, so I think you got to temper expectations, especially since he's sitting at 9.2K over there on DraftKings. I mean, we're sitting there and we're looking at the expectation that he's going to hit at least 20K. He only did that once so far in the season, or twice so far in the season. And yeah, his second highest performing week was this past week up against the Tennessee Titans when he did it. So I'm not going to sit there and play a lot of Jarvis Landry at 9.2K. He's probably going to be in less lineups for me than Donovan Peoples-Jones, to be honest with you. Not a big fan of these pass catching receivers over there for the Cleveland Browns. I think that they're overpriced and relatively unattractive. Now, I'm hoping, right, that people don't realize that this is a poor weather game, and it actually will take away from some of the options with Nick Chubb, with Kareem Hunt, with some of the tight ends, which we're about to talk about. I'm banking on the fact that people will play these wide receivers because they saw what happened over the past 2 weeks up against these poor defenses, and they'll end up putting a good amount of shares into these guys. I mean, I could see Jarvis Landry hitting 15 to 20% ownership, which is way too high at 9.2K. Now, if I'm sitting there and I'm going to rely on a pass catcher, right? If I'm going to sit there and look at a position that I want to attack to catch passes, we already brought up Kareem Hunt, which I'm going to actually dive into here in a second. But I want to actually talk about the tight ends because this is a tight end game for me for the Cleveland Browns. This is something that whether you play Njoku or whether you play Bryant, because Hooper is most likely out, it could be a smash play for you. And it could be low ownership as well, especially on the Njoku side. But what you have to figure out is, do you want to go with the move tight end who is going to be bringing in yardage for you? Or do you want to go with the inline tight end who will be operating off the play action fake and could get you 2 touchdowns in this game? For me, I'm going to lean Njoku. Njoku is the inline tight end for this matchup. He's been playing inline for the past few weeks. And honestly, I thought that he was going to be the move tight end while Hooper was in there being the inline tight end. That hasn't been the case. Njoku, even with his athletic profile, has been that inline blocking tight end. And honestly, it's something as to where I don't hate it. I really don't. I think that this is actually a good move for Njoku. I think not only does it give him experience for the future, but for DFS purposes, this is a huge, huge opening for people to take advantage of Njoku and his pricing. I mean, sitting there looking at it, over 25% of the team's passing touchdowns in the red zone so far this season have come from the tight end. Meanwhile, the tight ends who have scored on the Ravens so far have been that inline tight end. I mean, I think they had maybe Jason Kroom, who was more of a move tight end in the game where Zach Ertz got hurt. But to be completely honest with you guys, this is the opportunity to attack the inline tight end position. Njoku is $3,200 cheaper than Harrison Bryant. Check. Love that. He's playing the inline position. Check. Love that. He's put up 50 and a touchdown against the Ravens in week 1. Once again, check. Love that. And yeah, $3,200 cheaper. That's the last check mark. I'm going to lean Njoku on this one. He's my favorite flyer on this entire slate. I'm actually going to have quite a few shares of him for this matchup. Now, I'll still have Harrison Bryant in there. I'm still going to sit there and have Harrison Bryant in quite a few lineups, especially in lineups that I believe that not only the Browns are going to move the ball, but they're going to be in the red zone a good amount of opportunity. But I think that Harrison Bryant has a more upside with the yardage potential, with maybe a breakaway run, by the way. Meanwhile, I think that Njoku is going to dominate the red zone. We got to see what happens, but that's where I'm leaning with this one. As for the running game, ever since Calais Campbell's been out, the Ravens have been very subpar up against the run. And although he didn't practice this week, he did the same thing back a week ago prior to playing Dallas. And yeah, he played a amount of about 50% of the snaps. That could end up happening again. That's actually what I foresee happening. So he will be in there on first and second down. That's going to limit to an extent Nick Chubb and Nick Chubb's upside. And not tremendously. It's just one player. It's not going to completely destroy Nick Chubb's value or anything along those lines. But this creates a huge opportunity for Kareem Hunt, especially on draws and third and long situations where Hunt will be in the game. Now, Hunt has struggled ever since Chubb came back to the lineup, but Chubb has been an absolute monster. So it's understandable. I mean, sitting there and looking at these matchups that they've had, Kareem Hunt hasn't had to be in the game. He hasn't had to be a pass catching option. Chubb has been able just to tear these teams up, and it's been fine, right? So with Chubb struggling in week 1 up against the Ravens, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hesitate at his price. He is the second highest priced player behind Lamar Jackson, but I will have Chubb in quite a few amount of my lineups. But honestly, sitting there and looking at it, dude, I love his counterpart with Hunt. I love Hunt for this matchup. This game's going to be competitive. And yeah, I'm expecting decent usage out of Kareem Hunt. I really am. I think that Kareem Hunt could actually have a smash opportunity. So I will actually probably have more shares of Hunt than I actually will Nick Chubb in this matchup, especially, like I said, at Nick Chubb's price. Over the last 4 weeks, they've seen almost an equal amount of snaps, but Chubb has gotten 80 touches. Hunt, only 63. Like I said, though, it just makes sense with the matchups that they've had that Chubb has had that volume. They haven't really been, in a competitive matchup, and Chubb's just been running all over teams. I don't know if that's going to happen up against the Ravens. I think they're going to be in a good amount of third and longs, 3rd and 5 type situations where Hunt is going to have design plays for him. I think the Hunt's going to absolutely smash DFS lineups this week. At $3K less, Hunt is worth a play in quite a few lineups, and it allows these higher end Raven stacks to actually work. So yeah, I like Hunt. Hunt is going to be in a ton of my lineups. Now, the Browns, this is something as to where the offensive side has been clicking. The defensive side has kind of been up in the air. And I think that a lot of us expected the defensive side to step up with Denzel Ward and some of these other guys on this defense. And it just has not happened. So I do want to explore this other side when we talk about the Ravens offense. The only reason why teams aren't running as much on the Cleveland Browns this year is because they're able to pass on the Cleveland Browns this year. Even Lamar Jackson had 3 passing touchdowns in week 1. Now we're talking about Denzel Ward. And yeah, the best pretty much cornerback on the entire team being out. Kevin Johnson, who is actually a slot guy, is switching the outside. So that's not going to be pretty for this defense. I mean, we're sitting there and looking at the possibility of Marquise Brown seeing probably 80% of his snaps up against Kevin Johnson, who runs a 4.52. Dude, Marquise Brown is coming off 2 consecutive weeks of 8+ targets and a touchdown in each matchup. I know that the Browns are really good about not letting receivers get behind them, but guess what? Brown is sitting there as the perfect deep ball opportunity. Now, he's actually getting used underneath. And I hate Willie Snead. I'm going to dive into Willie Snead in a second. He's coming back in, so that's going to limit Brown's underneath usage. But if Brown can still see this 8-target type game, and he is getting passes underneath, and he can have 4 receptions for 50 yards underneath and then break off a big one, Brown could be a tournament breaker in this matchup in a game that I don't even like the passing opportunities. But being that he will end up being slightly contrarian as a bonus spot play, as a captain spot, as a VIP, whatever you end up wanting to call it, I'm telling you guys, like Marquise Brown is in a great opportunity to smash it. I mean, we just need to get the ball in his hands. Of his 16 targets over the past 2 weeks, only 5 classified as deep balls. So I'm just hoping that he can get the ball in his hands. He can break off some big ones. He can pick up some PPR points, especially. And then he breaks off one big one for 70 yards like he had a couple weeks ago and get a touchdown on that matchup. Now, like I said, there's something as to where Willie Snead just gets underneath my skin. I don't think that there's a single other player in all of DFS that I hate more than Willie Snead. Willie Snead has never, for the past 2 or 3 years that I've been really heavily invested in DFS, he's had probably 3 or 4 games where he actually made it worth a actual DFS play. Now, 3 of those games came this year so far, so I kind of like it a little bit more, but still, he just comes in to ruins people's lives, ruins their opportunities, and I hate it, man. I love Devin Duvernay as a flyer up against MJ Stewart over there in the slot, but now I can't do that, right? Because Willie Snead's going to be taking away some snaps. I'm still going to be playing Devin Duvernay, don't get me wrong, but, I'm sitting there and I love Miles Boykin as well, but guess what? Willie Snead is going to take up some of that opportunity. He's going to soak up some of those receptions or some of those targets, and Miles Boykin's opportunity is going to be limited. His upside is going to be limited. I mean, not to mention, of course, Andrews coming back as well. Now, I still like Miles Boykin to be able to grab a touchdown, right? I still love Devin Duvernay to be able to break off a long run. Plus, he's returning punts and kickoffs, so he could end up having a touchdown in that sense, which also makes the defense play. But, I'm sitting there and looking at the fact that Snead is just going to ruin this entire slate for me, and I hate it because I know that he's going to get like 3 receptions for like 25 yards, and he's going to take one of the touchdowns away from, either Miles Boykin or Mark Andrews or Devin Duvernay. And I hate it. But either way, looking at it moving forward, I'm going to be playing Willie Snead in a lineup, maybe one, just so that, he can ruin my life, but not completely ruin it altogether. But at his pricing at 5,800, like, what are the chances that he actually performs up to that level? I mean, maybe a 5% chance, if that, for 5,800. I hate it. He's either going to completely destroy your lineups. Snead is either going to completely blow up your lineup because you can't play another guy that's right around that price range or a little bit more expensive. Or he's going to end up, just barely allowing you to end up making big money because he barely produces over what his insinuated price line is going to be. I hate it. I hate Willie Snead. Man. As for Andrews, man, I really wanted Andrews to be my lock. And at first I took Marquise Brown. And the more that I dove into it, God, man, Andrews actually works in so many more lineups than what Marquise Brown works in. If it comes to the Ravens side of things. Like if I want to get heavy on the Ravens side, I think that Andrews is actually the option over Hollywood Brown. I'll still have Hollywood Brown in a bunch of my lineups for that. But Andrews, man, like he's sitting there and you could sit there and see a game where, hey, J.K. Dobbins gets 40 rushing yards on a drive. Lamar Jackson picks up another 40 on a drive. And then you have Andrews in and gets a touchdown, right? So this actually makes 3 players valuable for that drive. Meanwhile, Hollywood Brown, if you're going to sit there and expect Hollywood Brown to be a play, like Hollywood Brown has to be a captain type guy because he's going to take a 60-yard pass to the house. Now, Lamar Jackson, you can play with him, but you can't play J.K. Dobbins. Hollywood Brown isn't going to get caught from behind and get stopped inside the 10-yard line. You can't play Mark Andrews with him in very many lineups because they're going to cannibalize each other to an extent. So when it comes to playing Hollywood Brown, I love him in the bonus spots and in lineups that I'm going to go really Browns heavy. Meanwhile, with Mark Andrews, he's going to be my lock. He's going to be my number one play for lineups that are going to be Ravens heavy, regardless of who's in the captain, including him as well. So yeah, I'm sitting there looking at a very advantageous situation as to where I'm playing Mark Andrews. Now, we sit there, right? And we look at the Browns and their inability to stop the tight end. It's actually kind of like awing. We're talking about double-digit fantasy points in all but 3 games so far this season. Andrews caught fire right before he caught COVID. So I'm expecting him to go right back onto that position so he can duplicate his week 1 performance where he put up 23 points on this Browns defense. I think he's going to smash this week. They're going to have to take off some of their guys when it comes to the Browns defense. They're going to have to take off some of their secondary to prevent Hollywood Brown from getting deep. Mark Andrews is going to eat this week. Mark Andrews is a sexy play. The more I talk about him, the more I love it. Now, the curious aspect to this whole matchup, the one that is really going to make this difficult to play, is going to be the running back position. We look at J.K. Dobbins. He's getting the snaps and the volume as of late, aside from the 1 week that he missed with COVID. And honestly, I thought that he was going to have his breakout week this past week. But the volume just wasn't there. Now, he still touched the ball on 11 out of his 21 snaps played, but I need 20 touches from him in this game. I need 20 touches. Edwards is getting the efficiency carries just like he did last year. Meanwhile, J.K. Dobbins needs this volume. With this weather situation, I really do think it could happen. Like I talked about in a scenario where Andrews actually gets the touchdown, I think it's very possible that you could see a drive or 2 or 3 where J.K. Dobbins could easily rack up 40 to 60 yards, and then they pass it once they get in the red zone. Now, for that reason, I think that J.K. Dobbins can still have some breakaway runs, but keep in mind that the Browns are actually 7th overall in explosive run rates. So, yeah, they're actually really good about not allowing running backs to gain more than 10 yards per carry on them. I'm sitting there looking at J.K. Dobbins, if he can get that volume, as probably the number 1 producer on this slate. but he also has a very, very limited upside because of the snap shares. Like we talked about with Edwards. I mean, Edwards touched the ball, 7 times and had over 100 yards this past week. Edwards is always going to be there. And Ingram, you don't ever know when Ingram's going to pop up. Sure, Ingram's, role has been diminished over the past few weeks, or several weeks, I should say. But still, I'm sitting there looking at it and like the pricing is just, it makes it worth playing all 3 of these guys. We're sitting there and looking at Ingram at what? Let me look at this real quick. 20-something, 2K. Ingram's at 28. We've got Gus Edwards at 52. And then we've got J.K. Dobbins at 82. So J.K. Dobbins, if he doesn't end up getting, a touchdown and 100 rushing yards, because he doesn't really get involved in the passing game at all, he's essentially going to be a waste. Like, you need that touchdown and you need that 100 rushing yards. He hasn't been that reliable as to that fact. Now, his yards per carry is very good. He's probably the best running back on that team by a mile, but that team doesn't want to just run him out there and beat the brakes off. So I'm expecting J.K. Dobbins to still have a very good game, and he's more relevant by far in cash than he is in tournaments. But don't sit there and put J.K. Dobbins in every single one of your lineups. It's something that could absolutely blow it up and not give you a chance to compete. I think you should have equal shares of J.K. Dobbins, equal shares of Gus Edwards, and slightly less equal shares of Melvin Ingram, although that could actually be a money maker if he can get in the end zone a couple times. Like if Ingram gets 2 red zone carries, something along those lines, maybe J.K. Dobbins did end up running himself, completely out of breath, and Ingram has to come in to get these goal line carries. Ingram could actually break tournament lineups. So Mark Ingram is still a play for me, just slightly less than the other 2, especially at 2,800. Now, overall on the slate, just to give you guys a heads up, I'm going to wrap this show up. I've got some kids to teach. So when it comes to actually, I left that up the entire time. Good job, Bo. Your thing is up there. So anyways, when I sit there and I look at the slate, I look at the potential for this to actually hit the projected point total. I'm not loving it. But you have to sit there and you have to actually build a roster in this one that tells a major story because it is so intertwined. Like you can't sit there and go with, Marquise Brown in the, in the captain, or go J.K. Dobbins in the captain, right? And then sit there and play Marquise Brown, Mark Andrews, and another running back, and Lamar Jackson. Like there's going to be some sort of limitations when it comes to the opportunity that could be had. So sitting there and taking a look at it and being able to figure out this storyline is going to be crucial to you guys making money this week. And honestly, like I sit there and I say you should play cash, and I don't play near enough cash. I don't. Like I need to play more cash lineups. But for this one in particular, I think this is a straight up tournament opportunity for people to make very, very good money for this matchup, because I think the shares on the receiving side for the Browns are going to be absolutely like just way astronomical compared to what they could be. Now, I appreciate you guys for tuning in. If you guys ever want to catch any of our other content, Bo, who I left up on the screen, he crushed his DFS picks this past week. He actually called for Jonathan Taylor to get 150 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. He did exactly that. So if you guys want to go check out any of our content where we're talking about a lot of this stuff, make sure you guys go check out youtube.com/fantasy intervention. You guys can also follow us on Twitter at @joinourcircle_. Once again, that's @joinourcircle_. And then you guys can find all of our content combined at fantasyintervention.com. Once again, that's fantasyintervention.com. I appreciate you guys for tuning in, listening in. If you guys missed out on it, make sure you guys go back and listen to the show. It is short enough, only 30 minutes, so you guys can get in your fill before the games. Thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you all for letting us intervene with your fantasy football life. We're out.